I'd first like to recognize Mr. Frank Jocklick, who is the honorary consul of the United Kingdom here in Utah and has been so for over 12 years, perhaps 15 years. So welcome back again to campus today. I will keep the introduction just very brief in the interest of time. Dame Hay, literally this event was scheduled on Monday, and she is headed off to another engagement immediately after, so I want to leave as much time as possible that we can learn from her. But Dame Barbara Hay was appointed Consul General just last July and was previously posted in the same position to Istanbul. She has served in other positions across Uzbekistan and serving in the former Soviet Union 5 times in all. She is currently the Consul General to the United States in Los Angeles and will be addressing a number of topics. Generally, we've titled this UK-US Relations, which gives her full latitude to address all that's on her mind. And we look forward to hearing from her perspectives. Please join me in welcoming Dame Barbara Hay.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning. I have to say this is rather daunting for a little girl who came out of Scotland more years ago than I care to remember. And I have to confess that I don't have a script. This is my security blanket. It's very difficult coming to a new place when you don't know the place and you don't know the people, to know quite what you want to talk about and what people will be interested in. So I have to say a big thank you to you for taking a punt on someone that you don't know at all and to give me the opportunity to come to Brigham Young University, which has an amazing reputation. It goes before you. I was very humbled as I drove through the gate, I suppose, of the campus this morning to see your logo, as it were, "The world is our campus." And I thought, well, that's fine. Then I'm bringing a little bit of the world to you. But I know very well that you go out into the world and spread a word and make relationships. And that's just what my job is to do as well. I know that you send lots of people to the State Department. So as a diplomat, I ought to feel very comfortable among you. I know that many of you travel very widely, that you're great linguists. And I suppose one of the things I'm really interested to know is, because what I don't want to do is to talk to people about things that they know perfectly well already. It'd be really interesting to find out whether any of you have indeed travelled or served in parts of the world where I've been. So I've done, the headline, I guess, is 5 tours in the former Soviet Union, which started in 1975 in the Cold War, long before most of you were born. This is when a girl feels really old. I did a tour in Johannesburg in the apartheid era. I have served in Montreal for just a couple of years. I was ambassador in Uzbekistan and concurrently in Tajikistan and Central Asia. Those count as one of the 5 Soviet experiences. And I've latterly been in Istanbul in Turkey as Consul General. That was a very extraordinary post because I actually took over from a colleague who was killed along with 11 other members of our staff. About 100, little over 100 people injured physically or psychologically as a result of an Al-Qaeda bomb attack on our Consulate General. So that was quite a heavy tour of duty one way and another. But I'm interested to know if any of you have been in any of those parts of the world. Can you raise a hand? Wow. Значит, что, может быть, вы говорите по-русски чуть-чуть. Do any of you speak Russian? That's a relief. And can I ask where you've been? I mean, is it the Soviet Union or Turkey or Turkey?
Johannesburg.
Oh, great. Oh, we've got a lot in common. How lovely. How lovely. Well, in that case, what I thought I would do is to try to go through some of the headlines of the things I've done, the places I've been, and some of the issues that have been I should tell you that I'm not a political animal. In the diplomatic service, like the State Department, not all of us spend all of our time looking at the politics of what's going on. Obviously, you need that. You need to be aware of that. But actually, in a consulate, I spend a lot of my time looking at business and economic relationships, obviously, between the UK and the United States, and particularly the consular district in which I operate. We obviously offer all kinds of services to resident Brits and visiting Brits, of whom there are very many in the West Coast. We have a big science and innovation programme, which is linking universities and particularly researchers together. And the UK and the US have really strong relationships in that area. But let me maybe start by talking a little bit about, well, maybe going back to the beginning, I suppose. I'm from Scotland, I'm from Edinburgh, the most beautiful city in the world. Small but perfectly formed. Scotland is a little bit like coming into Salt Lake City, but on a smaller scale. We have a lot of mountains. Some of them do get snow-capped in the winter time, but not all. A lot of water. We're also a very poor country. Traditionally, small, perfectly formed, I suppose. Population of about 5 million in Scotland, although the population of the UK these days is near 60 million. And a bit like here, we understood that the only way to get out of poverty was to go into education. So a lot of years ago, a couple of 100 years ago, Scotland was one of the very earliest countries to have compulsory education for children. And that was the way, I guess, that the UK really built empire. Because as a result of all of that and our ancient universities in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, comparable to Oxford and Cambridge down south, we trained engineers, doctors, missionaries, all kinds of people who spread out because if you wanted to get ahead, you got away, you went away, you earned a living, and you built empire. And that, of course, has interesting connotations as well in the 21st century. So that's where I'm from. And to my astonishment, I found myself a member of Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service, which in those days, of course, a long time ago, we're talking about the early 70s, was absolutely male-dominated. It's very difficult for young people nowadays to understand what life must have been like, particularly for the girls, when actually there was then a rule that if you married, you had to resign. And nowadays, of course, we're taking our families, our partners around the world with us. We have officers in the diplomatic service, like in the State Department, on joint postings where maybe both partners are working in the same embassy. And indeed, we've had couples who have been ambassadors in adjacent countries. Colleagues of mine, one was ambassador in Slovenia and another was doing a job at one of the international organizations in Vienna. So they worked in parallel countries, neighbouring countries, and saw each other and their families at weekends. That is pretty unusual. Pretty unusual. So we like to think of us, although I think the impression that people have of the UK is of a country that might be rather traditional. Actually, we've moved a long way in very many respects. So I joined up, and actually I had learned Russian at an earlier stage and found myself in London, and subsequently, after a couple of years, learning Russian full-time with the army, prior to going to Moscow for the first time in 1975. And many of you, some of you will, sorry, I won't say many, but some of you will remember a Cold War, and many of you will only have read about it in your textbooks. And actually being there was a most extraordinary experience, particularly when you're only in your early 20s. And bear in mind that those days there was not such a thing as the internet and email, satellite television. The BBC was jammed when we tried to listen to the World Service. It was like being sent into exile, actually. But what a remarkable time. And of course, you don't understand the fact that you're witnessing history when you're going around your everyday life. It was only subsequently, as I went back in the late 80s, when Gorbachev was setting out his policies of glasnost and perestroika, openness and change, that one began to see the huge extent of the changes that were happening in that part of the world. Not all of which, of course, were very comfortable. And of course, you look at Russia today, and there are immense challenges in dealing with it. But I guess it's rather important to understand where a country has come from. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that one learns as one travels around, is to, as I think we articulated in an opening prayer, to give us an open mind, to try to absorb what's going on around us, not to come to a new place with preconceived ideas. And it's quite a difficult thing to do, I think, partly, of course, because there's so much information around, and it's much easier in a way, it's much more of a safety blanket to make up our minds about what we think is right and proper and the way to do things. And actually, we then forget that other countries, other nations, other people have a different point of view, and it's equally valid, may be different, but it's equally valid, particularly to them. And one of the key things is to establish connections, create relationships, and build up a knowledge and try to influence people. So we did the Cold War, and at a time when it was very difficult to establish any kind of relationship because of suspicions on both sides, and the other, altogether, the hugely difficult environment of a Europe that was split in two, an iron curtain between us. Going to South Africa in the apartheid era was not really much different. I used to say it was like the Soviet Union with sunshine. Again, a place where people were very constrained, where life was extremely controlled, a bit like the Soviet Union, where people weren't able to travel freely. To move from one place to another, you required permission to do so. Not at all straightforward. And again, we look back now and we see the most remarkable changes that are happening in southern Africa generally. And again, many of you, if you haven't been there, will inevitably travel to that part of the world. And you come closer to the to modern times, I suppose, in a career. In Central Asia, where I was able to learn or to watch a new country come out from under a Soviet blanket. And in many respects, they haven't moved on much. The same people are in charge that were in charge in the Soviet period. But one of the really key things there, of course, was to try to help embed a different way of doing politics, a different way of doing economic development. And I think it is a truism that we all work on lots of different levels. As an ambassador there, I could obviously work at a very senior level in government, but actually what was also really important was to work at a grassroots level, to work with NGOs and universities, and to try to help create exchanges both on the business side and the student side, and to try to influence people, find new ways of doing things. And you hope very much that some of what you do, of course, you leave a bit of a legacy. Of course, it's what we all want to do with our lives. You never know if you've actually done it. But what was really interesting there, too, was it was the first time that I'd actually lived and worked in a country where Islam was the common language. It was an unusual form of Islam because, of course, it had been overlaid by many decades of Soviet power. And people were beginning to find a voice, not only to find their political voice, but also to find a voice in their own personal beliefs. And that, of course, extended again into Turkey. Turkey was a remarkable place, as you know from having visited. Secular country, huge country, over 70 million people, a very, very large number of the population, a large proportion, young people under the age of 25, and a country that is absolutely key, not just for the UK and Europe, but for the United States as well. Turkey is a key and original NATO ally in a part of the world that is very tricky, very difficult. But the Turks, really ancient people there, understanding the environment in which they labour and actually being able to talk to countries that, quite frankly, we find it very difficult. So to have an ally that knows how to talk to people in Iraq, Iran, Syria, other countries of the Middle East, was a huge advantage. And of course, what's very interesting being in Istanbul, a bit like being in St. Petersburg, actually, you're in a comparatively sophisticated city at the western end of these countries with a very European outlook, who have traded for centuries with Europe and the wider world. And of course, the further east you go, the more you find traditional values and a traditional way of doing things. And yet, very well-educated people, very wise, very sound, extremely entrepreneurial. And the connections that one can make in a country like that are very important. So not only do you find yourself in a place where people think differently, behave differently, have a completely different culture, but you also find that you're all the time being confronted by new issues, new ways of doing things, and that's extremely refreshing. So we had the very interesting Islamic nature of the country to deal with. But the other big issues, of course, that were very important to us and to you to an extent, of course, were issues of terrorism, which is kind of finds a nexus in that part of the world. I'm not saying in Turkey, but generally in that part of the Middle and Near East. And issues like drug trafficking, people trafficking, things that wash up on our borders, come into our countries, onto our streets, and to deal with people, to try to do something about that, prevention rather than waiting until we had to cure very important issues, was really a remarkable experience for me. What's been really interesting about a career that's spanned now quite a long time, since the early 70s, is the way diplomacy has actually changed. In the olden days, it was very much a bilateral job. You went to an embassy and you dealt with a government, and that was what it was all about. Nowadays, diplomacy, like everything else, is global. Today, our issues, of course, are bilateral, but we find in Los Angeles, in our consular district, which includes Utah, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the 10 consulates across the states, and in the embassy, that the issues on which we're actually dealing and with which our partnership with the United States is so important is the global economy. It is terrorism, it's energy security and climate change. And the tools that we have now, of course, are quite different. In the olden days, when you had a typewriter and a telex machine, things were much slower. One could argue that it might have been much more thoughtful, considered, and nowadays everything is rushed. But the tools that we have nowadays of the internet and email, WebEx, Twitter, Facebook, all these things that bring people together, it makes information gathering and information giving so much easier. It means that we can actually engage with people that we had never engaged with before. It's all about capturing information, knowledge, experience, trying to persuade, cajole, sometimes bully people into a point of view that makes sense for both of us, or all of us, internationally. And of course, in the last year, hugely preoccupied by an economy that has been going only in a downward trend. And what's very interesting about that, again, is the way that the transatlantic relationship has been extremely important to try to maintain or prevent a spiral of real recession and depression happening. It's been very instructive to see the way that the Prime Minister in London has been talking to the President here and other people in the administration to try to put in place measures to sustain our economies as best we can. It's down to all of us, of course, to make a difference, to be positive, and to try to look for opportunities. Sorry, Frank, I thought that might be mine. I've realised I forgot to switch mine off. But the transatlantic relationship goes much wider than the current issues of the day. And what, of course, is amazingly instructive for me coming here to this other superpower that I used to hear so much about when I was in the Soviet Union, is to see in practice the kind of history that our two countries have, that have really created such important relationships between London and Washington and the UK in general and the United States. The fact that the values we share are so similar, the values of freedom and democracy, free markets, rule of law, that our cultures are absolutely intertwined, and it's not just the English language. With apologies to people who come from elsewhere, my taxi driver from the airport yesterday was an Iranian. The gentleman who kindly brought me here this morning is Polish. Frank is originally from Austria. We're all international here in Salt Lake City, it seems to me, as we are elsewhere. But the English language is what binds us. It's our real common denominator. And that's before we have the film, the television, the books, the novels, the writings, the academic exchanges. We have the personal links, obviously, through our families. And we have business links that are immensely important. 1 million people every morning get up in the UK and go to work for American companies. And 1 million people in the United States get up in the morning and go to work for UK companies in the United States. We are your largest overseas investor, and you are our largest overseas investor. In California, I know we sustain 100,000 jobs. I don't know what the number is here in Utah. I need to do my homework for my next visit. But you've got major British companies here as well. You might not know that they're here, and that's probably a good thing, because they are then part of the fabric of your very important society, in the same way that American companies are part of the fabric of ours, and we welcome that. And one of the really important jobs that we do is to try to persuade more of you to go to the UK and establish companies to work there. And we want more UK companies to come here. It's really important, again, for not only for our own economies, but for future world growth, that we retain this ability to cross borders, encourage the continuation of this free market philosophy that we have. So we're very keen to keep that going. We're, of course, fighting with you. We're at your shoulder in Iraq and in Afghanistan now, in Helmand and particularly in the south of Afghanistan. It used to be fascinating for me when I was in Central Asia to look at Afghanistan from the Uzbek border by the Friendship Bridge at the point at which the Soviet army retreated from Afghanistan in 1989. To be in Gorno-Badakhshan, which is the eastern part of Tajikistan, by the Vatan corridor that overlooks this thin wedge of Afghanistan and then across to the mountains of Pakistan, and wonder what Afghanistan would be like. And for 2 pins, if there was a job there, after Los Angeles, I think I would quite like to do a turn there. But of course, it is hugely difficult. We're taking our military jointly are doing a remarkable job there. And I think all the films that are now coming out don't actually do it all justice. But one of the key things now is the rebuilding of this country, to try to reinforce a sense of what it is to be an Afghan, what it is to be a nation. And the work that, again, that we're doing jointly, particularly on civilian development, NGO development, political development, is as important as any of the military strategies that we have. And it's a huge compliment, I think, to our nationals who are working there, that they work so well, they understand each other, and that they have really true important goals. And we hope that with all our support, help, that they're going to succeed. I've spoken quite enough about me, my career, where we're at, slight impressions of what's important to the UK and US, without mentioning a lot of other stuff that's going on. But what I really wanted to do here this morning was to take some of your questions, have a discussion with you, and hear what you have to offer. Because it's not a lot of fun for me just coming and talking to a lot of people and then disappearing off the scene. It's much, much more fun, actually, to get to know some of you a bit more personally. That's what I'd really like to do. I'm much more of a people person than a title might give you credit for, might make you understand. So I'm very happy to throw the floor open. I'm sorry if what you wanted was a treatise on Afghanistan or Iraq or policies in the European Union. I could tell you a little bit about some of that, but at 10 o'clock on is it a Wednesday morning or a Thursday morning, I wasn't exactly sure that that was what you were looking for, but I'm very happy to take this in any direction you want to come or want to go. Please.
My name is Kirk Evans.
Hello, Kirk.
Surrey.
Oh, how lovely. How lovely.
Which was great. I wonder if you would comment on Israeli-UK relations now. I see that the UK recently sent home one of the diplomats from Israel, and there's a lot of commotion about the Israelis who use UK passports. And I just wondered if you would comment on that situation.
I can certainly comment on it. We've actually asked the Israeli embassy to withdraw one of their diplomats. This has followed an investigation by our Serious Organised Crime Agency about the use of British passports in the recent incident with which you'll be very familiar. This was not an inquiry into the incident itself, because that's still going forward with the Emiratis in particular. And so this was purely on the use of British passports. And what we've done, obviously, is to have been in touch with the Israelis, who were immensely open to our inquiries. Israel, like for us in the UK, as for the United States, is a really important ally and partner. What's going on in the Middle East and with the Middle East process is absolutely fundamental to the security of our nations and the Middle East and the world. And we will obviously, like you, continue to give huge support to the Middle East peace process. Both the processes that are being run in Washington, the processes that are being undertaken by Tony Blair and other people in the British government, absolutely key. But one expects one's allies to respect your own nation, and the use of British passports was not particularly welcome to the British government. We've obviously been in touch with all these people who, as one said, I went to bed, a citizen, and I woke up as a suspected terrorist. This is not particularly welcome. So I think 11 of the 12 now have new passports, biometric passports, and of course they will continue, their names will continue to be on an Interpol list, which will be uncomfortable for them. So we very much hope that the Israelis will continue to work with us to put our relations back on an even keel, to rebuild the trust that we very much want with them, and that we'll be able to go forward in the way that we've been used to. And we'll await the outcome of the inquiries that are going on, that are being watched with such great interest, even here in Salt Lake City. This is a really, really important issue for both our governments, I think. Not at all, not at all. Yes?
My name is Christian Hansen.
How do you do?
I'm actually from Los Angeles. So
Oh, right.
I'm really glad that I'm going to speak loudly now. Maybe. Okay. Anyways, I am interested in learning about United Kingdom's relations with North Korea. I know that relations were established in
Yeah.
2001, and that the British Council employs 4 full-time English teachers in Pyongyang and universities there. What other efforts is the UK doing to try and work with North Korea in the denuclearization, or just trying to build the country up, or even to not make the situation as tense over there?
I wish I could say I was an expert in North Korea, and I apologise that I'm not going to be able to talk very much about it. So what I can say is almost purely speculation. We do have an embassy there, and I admire them. It must be quite a difficult, isolated place in which to work. The British Council is an extraordinary organisation. It's not a government organisation. Do sit down. Thank you. Thank you. Its principal role is it deals with education, culture, science, and it has a remarkable history. I think it was founded in the late 1940s of dealing with education and actually doing teaching around the world. It was particularly well known for libraries, and a lot of people, particularly in former Commonwealth countries like India and Pakistan, for example, used to rely, I think, on the British Council to a very large extent for access to literature and teaching materials generally. Like every other organisation now, it's changed with the times. I wouldn't be surprised if they were in Pyongyang, but I don't know for certain, so I will take your word on that. In which case, what they will be doing is no doubt teaching English as a foreign language. They're not a political organisation at all, but obviously part of the role and part of teaching English will be to talk about the United Kingdom as well. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, you can't teach English and not talk about the UK. It's simply impossible. So if they're doing that, then they'll be doing a great job, I'm sure. And obviously, there will be a very interesting relationship with our embassy in Pyongyang and in Seoul and no doubt Beijing, because that, again, that nexus of relationships is immensely important. So I'm sorry that I can't talk at all about what they do, but a bit like you, I mean, this is an immensely intelligent audience. You cannot be in North Korea if you're not also going to be taking an interest in what is happening socially, politically, economically, militarily. And as far as the nuclear threat is concerned, I can only offer a reasonably intelligent opinion that there will be very close connections too with International Atomic Energy Authority and other international organisations that observe these issues and try to do something about it in the same way that, and again, no doubt talking to allies here in the United States, in the same way that we're doing over Iran, for example. So all these things will be under the radar, I imagine, but also happening. Thank you for the question. Good question. Clearly, the next time I come, I'm really going to have to know everything about every part of the world. But that's good for me.
As I mentioned to you on the drive over, BYU operates a fairly significant study abroad program. Over the last couple of years, as British immigration and visitor laws have changed just a bit, some of our students and faculty have begun to encounter some difficulties as they enter the country. is that, could you help us understand the context of,
Absolutely.
Of that? I suspect that our students aren't being targeted any differently than anyone else, but help us understand the context of that.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I'm very, very happy to talk about that. I tell my visa section, we've got 3 visa operations across the States in New York, Chicago and Los Angeles, where we're dealing with about 50,000 visa applications a year. That, in my terms, the visa team is the most important part of the consulate. My UK trained investment team are actually the best performing team of its kind anywhere in the world, and do phenomenal things with business and investment. But actually, when you think about it, visas, anyone's first impression of any country is the way they get to that country. And it's of absolute fundamental importance to me that anyone who wants a visa for the UK is treated quickly, efficiently, in a friendly way, absolutely user-friendly, because we want you to come. We actually at the moment have about 40,000 American students in the UK. We've got quite a lot of UK students here as well. We have about 4 million American tourists visiting the UK every year. I've already talked about the business relationship. It's of absolutely critical importance to the UK economy that people who want to go there get there, and that the processes are made as easy as possible for them. There's lots on our website about visas, and of course, like the United States, like most other countries in the world, because the world has changed, we really have a need to ensure that our borders are kept as secure as we possibly can. And you know the issues that you go through at any airport in the world, in the United States, London, the UK is no different. And we took a decision some years ago, rather than have queues of people outside our embassies, we were going to try to be much more efficient about our processes. And of course, the trouble is that with the ease of travel now, and the ease particularly of cheap travel, more and more people want to go than we're actually capable of handling ourselves on a day-to-day issue, people just queuing up for visas. So what we, as you have done, I think, and certainly the Australians and Canadians have done, is we've developed what we call a points-based system for people who require visas to go. Basically, it takes you through a form, and you answer the questions, you give your biometrics, your fingers are scanned. Here we're using, as a partner to do that, the Department of Homeland Security, which is working phenomenally well for us. So we're very, very grateful for that. And the applications that then come into our consulates and embassies around the world, and particularly into Los Angeles. What we found last year was that the centre back in London decided to change the system slightly for students wanting to go to the UK. And it's no secret that it happened at absolutely the wrong time, just as we were having a wash of applications hitting our desks. And I mean, my team were fantastic, actually, because they were ringing up students and saying, look, we really ought to refuse your visa because you've not given us the original piece of paper that we asked for. If you can send it to us, in the next 48 hours, you will get your visa. Sometimes it's just a case of reading the rules, reading the guidance properly, because we really want you. We are not targeting students because we don't want students to come. Quite the opposite. Apart from anything else, I mean, we want you to come as scholarship students. We haven't talked at all about Marshall scholarships, which are scholarships to do undergraduate and indeed postgraduate, mainly postgraduate study, and research study in the UK. There are Fulbright scholars that go, there are Gates scholars that go, there are Rhodes scholars that go to the UK. We really want you to be there. So I think the trick is that if you have, and what I need to do then is to ensure that the international department here knows us, so that when you are sending students to the UK at all, or to your campus in London, that you let us know and we can help you through the system. It's not easy. We are human beings behind all of this. But as I say, it's partly because in trying to effect a secure means of ensuring that the right people get into the UK and the wrong people don't, given the numbers, it's inevitable that some people who are perfectly legitimate are going to find themselves facing a bit of a hiccup. But it's not intentional at all. And indeed, what we found in the course of last summer, when we did have a lot of issues with student visas, that talking to people in London, they were actually being immensely flexible about the way we were able to interpret the regulations that they had imposed on us. So there's very much a dialogue, and there's a real wish, a very strong urge to get it as right as we can. So I would like to be able to say to you that any issues that you had last year won't be repeated this. But in order to do that, let's talk about it and make sure that you have a connection in my office to make it smooth and easy. I think it's wonderful that you have a campus in London. I imagine that there's huge competition to be there. It's an astonishing city. I was saying to Frank in the car this morning that, to my mind, London is now just about the most exciting city in the world. It has changed out of recognition. It's lively, interesting. The transport is great. You can get in a train and be in Paris in 2 hours on the Channel Tunnel. I mean, it is just fantastic. And the great thing that we're all excited about, which you will know very well from your own experiences here, we're immensely excited about the Olympic Games in 2012. That's going to make a huge difference in the UK and in London. There's a lot of building going on, particularly towards the east of London, new transport infrastructure, new stadia. It's going to be fantastic. And one of the things I should say to you that just a couple of days ago, I was talking to Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the Queen's daughter, at Los Angeles Airport. She was in transit back from a gig she'd been doing in the South Pacific. And I was telling her I was going to Salt Lake City, and her eyes lit up, and she remembered being here for the Olympics. And, of course, she was in Vancouver in February for the Winter Olympics there. So we've got quite a lot in common around Olympics, you and I. So it's going to be a great time for anybody to be going to London and to be seeing the UK and the rest of Europe. I do envy you. Wish I could turn the clock back.
Would it be okay if we ended the questions there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Presentation.
Yeah.
Typically, we would hope to have Dame Hay here for the entire day. We could do the full tour, the luncheon, meet more of our students and our faculty. I know there are students studying British politics, economics, English majors who would love to spend more time with you. We hope this will be not your last visit to campus. But just to hopefully entice you back, we have a book of memorable images of campus.
Marvelous.
And a medallion that we think will be a little bit easier to carry back than a large plaque that we typically provide. But we hope you'll come back. We'll have a plaque next time.
I'd love to. Thank you very, very much
thank
indeed.
You very much.
That's marvellous. That's marvellous. Gosh, it's super. Greeks bearing gifts. Thank you very much indeed. What I would like to do is indeed to come back. And I think what we might try to do the next time is that, of course, it will be different people next time, but perhaps throw some questions into the hat, send them off to me to the consulate before I come, and then I really will press the buttons that you want me to press. Because it is quite daunting coming to an unknown audience, not with clearly quite different interests, whether it's Israel or North Korea or transatlanticism or economies. So I'm very happy to bone up and give you what you really want, and I will much look forward to it. And in the meantime, these will sit on my desk in Los Angeles, reminding me that I do have a return visit to make. Thank you very much indeed.